Hello and welcome back to HR Stew. My name is Regina Direly.
And I'm Holly Nels.
And this is HR Stew.
For years, workplace conversations have centered around protecting employees, ensuring fair treatment, safe environments, and accountability from leadership. And those protections are incredibly important, but today we're switching it up a little bit, because sometimes the employee is actually in the wrong. From weaponized HR complaints to managers who are afraid to discipline employees, we're diving into questions many HR professionals quietly wrestle with. Has the workplace pendulum swung so far that accountability is getting lost? So I'm going to start out with this question. In your opinion, have HR and employees overcorrected to the point where managers feel powerless? And do you feel that change is for better or worse?
It's your favorite HR term. It depends. It really depends on the organization and the leadership. But I have seen a lot of managers who are trying to overcorrect out of fear of repercussions from the employees, fear of getting sued, all of those things.
I don't think that we've gone too far in protecting employees, but I do think we've underdeveloped accountability to go along with it. And I think it's great that employees feel comfortable speaking up. I do think we have an issue with managers feeling comfortable, like you've just said, knowing how to respond to it or how to say no. Right. Actually, just in a separate conversation that I had with our implementation manager, I said this very casually, but I said, just because someone asks for, I used the S word, doesn't mean you have to say yes, right? And she said, oh, you should write an article on that. And I just did, right? So this is like in the same vein, but I just think we have a lot of managers that don't feel comfortable navigating the expectations of kind of the younger workforce, if we want to say that.
Or having those difficult conversations.
Correct.
Yeah.
Some people are conflict avoidant, don't know how to deal with it. So it's an opportunity.
Yeah, definitely.
So moving on, our first segment is going to be about the possible rise of complaint culture. HR departments exist for a reason. Employees need a place to go when something isn't right. But what happens when every workplace frustration becomes a formal complaint? My first question about this is, have you seen an increase in employee complaints over the years? And if so, why do you think that is?
I've seen a little bit of an increase. It's just due to the increase in legislative changes or law changes.
I mean, I guess it depends on how far back we're talking as far as have I seen an increase. From when I started my HR career, when there really wasn't many complaints.
You weren't allowed to.
Then I don't know if you weren't allowed to. I just think what we tolerated was just different.
True.
Right? So, or just, it was just a different expectation. So yeah, if we're framing it over the course of a 30-year period,
right,
there's been an extreme increase in complaints. But in the last, let's say since COVID, if we're going to use that, so in the last 6 years, I think there's absolutely been an increase in complaints. Maybe the pause that we had, the brief pause that we had with COVID, created some unrest in general. And I think, especially when people were allowed to work from home and then changing, and I don't know. I definitely think that there's a pretty big uptick in complaints in general. And it's across the board. It's not just about one thing. It's not like everybody's filing sexual harassment charges. Right. It could be any number of things, but I cannot remember the number. In one of my trainings that I did, I can't remember, but it was like a percent. It was a crazy percent. It was like hundreds of percent higher in accommodations, like especially with mental health accommodations that have happened just in the past several years. Right. So that's not a complaint. So it's not exactly the same thing. But just in general, the traffic is a lot higher.
Do you think that's because people are starting to take care of their mental health now?
I'm not sure. I think there's definitely, I don't know. I'm certainly not a mental health professional for sure. But I think there's more awareness. And I do think that there was, especially during COVID for some professions, including ours, there was absolutely burnout.
Yeah.
But I think life is just hard. Everything's expensive and there's just a lot of expectations. Companies are just chronically understaffed and you're just expected to do more with less. And I don't know. I'm veering off a little bit here, but I think that all creates a culture of people being unhappy. And then, when people are unhappy, complaints are going to rise, right?
Yeah. And then I know people talk about generations, different generations have different values, work from home balance, all of that stuff. I wonder if because people got to work from home, got to do their laundry on their break and everything. And now a lot of companies are calling people back into the office.
100% too, not even one day.
Yeah. And they're just fed up. We could do our job. We could get our laundry done and not commute an hour each way or 30 minutes each way. And they're demanding that they are still allowed to have this flexibility.
Especially now with the gas prices, they've already increased drastically. So that's going to add another maybe somewhat unreasonable expense onto people that, especially if you're commuting far, and gas prices is the timely thing. So are expected to just continue to go up right now. At least that's what everybody is reporting. Not everybody.
Right.
I don't know.
A lot of people are reporting.
Correct.
Yes.
But look, not all complaints are bad. It just depends. The issue isn't volume either. It's quality and intent, right? If a complaint is valid, then you're glad that someone came forward with it.
Right.
It fixes the culture. It fixes behavior. It addresses things sometimes. But sometimes it just creates more complaints, right? When you do a full investigation and someone doesn't like the outcome of the investigation, because sometimes it's hard, especially when it's like one person against the other. There's no witnesses. There's no anything. And people want action. And I can't give you that. And I can't tell you everything that you want either.
Right.
So I don't know. It's complicated is the answer. And it depends.
And I think, too, people just want to be heard sometimes. And maybe it's not a complaint, but they just want to be heard or listened to or validated. I remember when I first started here, one of our former bosses, he made a comment to me that HR is a psychiatrist, a marriage counselor, a sounding board, a school counselor, all of these things all built into one, not to mention an HR professional. And I don't know why that stuck in my head for the longest time.
It's true. I think one of the major problems that we have with complaints, not to veer off a little bit, is that sometimes, and not all the time, obviously, complaints that are being filed are about someone's discomfort.
Right.
And not actually wrongdoing. So that sometimes is also really hard to address. If someone's unhappy and you're trying to address that because you see value obviously in the person and you want to make them happy when possible.
Right.
I don't know, that I feel like that is happening a lot too. People misunderstand. Sometimes you're uncomfortable at work. That's okay. Right. I don't love everything that I have to do either, but I do it because it's my job.
Right.
All right. So you touched on this a little bit, but my next question is, do you feel employees sometimes confuse the I don't like this with this is unfair? And do you think this is becoming more common?
My short answer is yes.
Yeah, I actually did just say it, right? But it's like not every frustration is a policy violation.
Right.
Period.
Right.
Work is frustrating. We have people to report to. We have things to do. Not every outcome turns out the way that you want. Work is frustrating sometimes.
And I forget the saying, like work is a 4-letter word because can be frustrating. It can be hard. It can be grueling, all of those things. So
I just saw a clip. I've never watched Mad Men. I heard it's fantastic. I've never watched it, but I always see this clip come across, and it's probably because I'm in HR and our phones are listening. But it's the one with Don Draper where he is talking to whoever his assistant is. I can't remember who it is. But she was complaining about how she doesn't get thanked or whatever. He's, that's what I pay you money for. That's the thank you, whatever. It's okay. That's rough, but also true.
I've never watched Mad Men either. Maybe I should go watch it.
I keep on saying it's on my list, but
yeah,
it's overwhelming, the whole series. It just seems like a lot.
Yeah.
All right. So to close up this topic, how should HR differentiate their actions between legitimate concerns and normal workplace conflict?
I think really listening to the concern, listening to the complaint, and categorizing it. Does this fall in the harassment category?
Right.
Does this fall in the sexual harassment category? Wrongful termination? Just really assessing, does the complaint meet the definition of those different categories?
Right. And HR's role is not to validate every feeling.
Right.
It's to assess every situation.
Right.
Right. And there's a certain amount of triage, like you just talked about.
Yeah.
Right. Like what category, is this illegal? Is this unethical? Or is this just uncomfortable?
Right.
So the truth of the matter is you could feel something very deeply and still be completely wrong about what it means.
All right. So switching gears a little bit here, we're going to talk about policies. And policies exist to protect employees and employers, but occasionally they get used in ways that were never intended. So to start, have you ever experienced an employee twisting the plain language of a policy to serve their own best interests? And
Yes.
what happened?
I have a really good example of this. And we had a client who they had terminated an employee for sleeping on the job. And so this employee was caught sleeping on the job. They terminated the employee, and then unemployment came around. And because the handbook, the code of conduct, did not list that the employee was not allowed to sleep on the job at their desk when they're there from 8 to 5, the employee was awarded unemployment. So this is the reason why we now have under code of conduct. I don't know if you guys have ever read our handbook, but I think the last bullet or second to last bullet for all of our clients says sleeping on the job now because of that one unemployment claim.
That's interesting. And I don't mean to not address this question, but I've also seen people win for sleeping on the job because it was a validated medical reason.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you can still get around it.
Yeah. This is true, but
I think once certain employees learn certain language, they certainly can apply it strategically.
right.
And that's all I'll say there.
All right. So do you think HR should address policy misuse directly?
So I've seen in some organizations where if an employee comes to them and tries to manipulate how a policy is worded, or there's an employee issue, the organization, the employer, will then try and create a policy about whatever the issue is. And you become so constricted and policy becomes so burdensome because everything you have to write a policy about you can only take 2 waters from the fridge or
Right. Look, I think, almost every policy that was written is because somebody did something.
Right.
Like, it was created to address that. And you almost need those people. Like in the call center industry, we used to have this guy that worked for us, and he would always, we ended up firing him ultimately, but we always joked that he was really good at figuring out the loopholes. Like he would always figure out ways to not take calls.
Right.
And then eventually that got him fired because it was call avoidance and he was hanging up on people that were calling. But it made us fix things, right? But I think sometimes you do go overboard, right?
Yeah.
Like policies are there as guidelines. You don't want to have limitations or not be nimble at all,
Right.
to be able to serve your population,
right.
right, of employees.
A client gave me a sticker that said, "I'm the reason HR writes policies." I thought that was hilarious. Not me, literally, because I'm not.
But like when everything is a violation, nothing's a violation.
Right.
As well.
Right.
All right. So for our last topic, we're going to talk about managers. One unintended consequence of a heavy complaint culture is that some managers become hesitant to manage at all. This can result in overextending HR and less feedback in real time. Do you think as time goes on, there is a rise in managers who are avoiding accountability conversations out of fear?
I wouldn't say, and this is just from my experience, I wouldn't say that they're avoiding accountability conversations out of fear. They just don't know how to approach them correctly. So they come ask HR, "Hey, this is what I'm considering saying." And it's really just a learning event as time goes on. They're learning how to approach those conflict conversations with their team.
I think it's tricky because I do think that there are a number of managers out there in the world that just do not know how to have these conversations.
Conflict
Right.
avoidance.
And so they think like that by avoiding it, they're being kind, and they're not. They're just prolonging the inevitable.
Right.
And they're allowing bad behavior. Let's just say it's bad behavior. We don't know what it is, but to continue.
Right.
So I don't know. I think just as often, some people get promoted to be managers because they're really good at doing the thing that they're now managing, and they're not managers. They shouldn't be managers, but they now found themselves in this position because that's the next progression, right? So they're not equipped to have these conversations. And sometimes actually having a really good HR partner to help guide you through and take the stigma off of it is really helpful, I think. I think we could add a lot of value
Yeah.
if they're willing to go through the process with us.
Agreed.
And knowing that we could step in if things start to go the wrong way, as they do sometimes.
And if they're eager to learn and grow and progress in their career and not just stay the manager who was put in that position.
Right.
So you certainly touched on this, but I'm going to ask it directly. How can HR support managers in having tough conversations without having to single-handedly be a part of all tough conversations?
I think actually making them have the conversations, I think, is critical.
Right.
I think that a lot of times HR is used as a crutch to have those conversations. That's really unfair as well, because it does shape our reputation within an organization, our relationship with our coworkers too, because we don't want to just be doing these things, right? There's positive strategic things that we could be doing to help the organization.
I had one manager at an organization, and they had me sit in on a conflict call with one of their employees. And they said, Holly, I just want you to be present in case I veer off or I say something wrong. And I sat in and helped them out on a few times here and there, but they did really well. And then they said, can you provide me really solid feedback? And I did. I provided them solid feedback of when the employee mentioned this, I probably wouldn't have said X, Y, and Z. I probably would have changed it. And this is what direction. And she commented back to me. She said, that was amazing feedback. I really appreciate that, because she wanted to learn and grow in her leadership opportunity.
Right. And there's a self-consciousness with them sitting in with their manager, right, to show that they don't know how to handle these situations.
Right.
So I think taking the stigma off of it and just saying, I'm here for you. This is what I recommend you would say. If this happens, say this, or if this happens, say nothing. Right. Whatever it is, I think we could add a lot of value and help people feel more comfortable doing that without feeling like there'll be repercussions for them not knowing what to do.
It's really empowering leadership.
All right, so next we go to the segment Ask HR, where people can go online to the forum and ask professionals questions and get answers. This comes from user Successful Bridge 37. It is titled, When is Enough Enough? It reads, we have an employee who returned from maternity leave almost 2 months ago. Because of complications, we extended her leave with pay for an additional 6 weeks. However, when she returned to work, she made no arrangements for childcare. She asked to work from home so she could care for the child full time. The problem is that this position is and always has been 100% in person. It's a supervisor role and the entire team works in the office, so the answer had to be no. At that point, she said she needed the job and used all of her vacation and sick time to try to find childcare. After about 2.5 weeks, she did find something, but since then, she's only managed to come into the office a handful of times. She's been spoken to several times about the attendance issues, but there's always an explanation, illness, or childcare conflict. On a few occasions, we tried to be generous and allow her to work from home on special projects. Unfortunately, none of those projects were completed adequately, and some were not completed at all. Just this week alone, she has already missed a day and a half of work. One of those days was reported by her own team, who said she appeared to be trying to get away with not working while her direct manager was out of the office. Now we have a leadership split. One of our executives believes it is time for termination. The other wants to show more leniency because she is a first-time parent. But at this point, we have paid nearly $8,000 in salary this year for essentially no work. So the real question becomes this: at what point do we cross the line from being family-friendly to being negligent and holding someone accountable for poor performance and allowing it to negatively impact the rest of the team?
Yeah, look, I have a lot of empathy for the situation. She's a first-time parent. She has childcare challenges. That's real.
Right.
But empathy really can't replace accountability in this situation. This is not a leave or an accommodation issue. This is a performance and attendance issue at this point. So the organization has already demonstrated significant flexibility and good faith. She's taking advantage. She had time to figure out childcare. When you're working in 100% on-site job, it's unfortunate that's the job that she has, because some people can, especially when babies are little, can sometimes get away with, even though you're not supposed to.
Right.
But they can, it's not disruptive because they sleep a lot.
Yeah.
Right? She had plenty of time to make arrangements for this or try to secure another job, and she's not doing that. She's, bottom line, not meeting the minimum requirements of the job.
Right.
So they either need to write her up. I don't think they go right to terminate. Did they say they wrote her up? I can't remember.
It just says many conversations.
Right. They
They've
need
had
to
many
write her up
conversations.
officially.
Yeah.
And then pull her signed job description and go over that with her. These are the requirements of the job. You're not meeting them. You really cannot debate that at this point. I just feel like they're putting themselves in jeopardy by not addressing this because they are setting a precedent, not just for this, but for any other kind of health-related issue, right? So I don't know. Look, I believe in supporting new parents as much as possible.
However, the employer still needs to function as a business. And I don't know if it's a key role or even not a key role. They still need to function as a business to ensure that everybody else or whatever products they're selling or whatever the case may be, they're still able to do their job, receive revenue, to allow all of the other employees to receive a paycheck. And can you imagine morale for those other employees who are
they're pissed off.
this?
Her direct reports are complaining about her.
Oh, yeah. They are beyond pissed off.
So it's unfortunate the world is not set up.
Yeah.
For people, because childcare is so expensive right now, which is probably the issue.
Right.
It really is. And so we've had this issue even here internally where we've had people that were new parents. And then because most of us work remotely,
right.
And they've said they wanted to bring in a nanny. And I've said this before, and I don't believe this is controversial. Nannies are for rich people.
Right.
Unless you actually are able to afford to have a live-in nanny. Otherwise, you have a babysitter, and that's a part-time employee who is not reliable.
Right.
And I made that statement, and that turned out to be true in every case. Right. So unfortunately, nannies are for rich people. So
if you au pair.
Okay. But you have to have housing for them and still an income.
Yes. Rich people stuff.
So rich people stuff. No offense to rich people, I guess. I don't know, are they offended? But our society makes it really tough. It sounds like she's single, or maybe her husband just works full time and it's not negotiable for them or her partner to watch the baby at all. But it's tough. But it's also like they have to address this. Unfortunately, she's going to have to actually figure out how to afford to put her child in childcare.
Yeah.
This problem's not going away. It just started.
Right. I don't disagree. I did part-time. My husband and I worked opposite each other when I had Sterling, but I was just working to pay for daycare. So I empathize with this person, and we had the ability to where I could work opposite of my husband and not put him in childcare.
I mean, when my daughter was in childcare and she started an actual daycare, I paid my sister, which made me very comfortable for the first 18 months of her life. Right. And then she went into an official, wonderful daycare. I loved it. She went there until she started kindergarten.
Right.
But the cost of that at the time to me seemed very exorbitant. But now it's like triple.
Yeah.
Like truly. It's more than people's mortgages in some cases.
Yeah.
So I don't really.
I couldn't imagine.
I don't know. It's tough.
It is. So that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for listening, and if you've enjoyed your time with us, please subscribe and leave a review. If you have any HR stories or questions to share, message us on Instagram at hr.stew. I'm Holly.
And I'm Regina.
And we'll see you next time on HR Stew.